There's a host of new contenders in the latest set of the Alpha Clash TCG, and this is the tier list. Now, if you're completely new to the channel, welcome. This is the tier list where I rank these new contenders for the Alpha Clash trading card games into one of 4 tiers. Now I'm going to quickly go through the 4 tiers that we can place these in to give you an idea of what I mean by one or the other. At the very top there is the Progenitors tier. The Progenitors tier is for the contenders that will dominate the meta, that will change the platform of the game. Not very many goes into that, but it is there because every now and then it does happen. Just below that is the Harbinger tier. Now the Harbinger tier is for the meta viable contenders. Those I think we will see showing up in high level play. Those who have potential to win big tournaments. Just below that is the Alpha tier. The Alpha tier is for the contenders that will show up at local events, maybe win you a game or 2, and maybe an oddball once more support comes around for them, but are not a top tier competitor today. And finally, at the very bottom, we have the Pool tier. These are the contenders we build and play with if we like the contender, if you like the story or the game plan that they provide to us, not as much for winning contests with them. So that is the 4 tiers. Let's go into the contenders. So first up is Kheprius, the Scarab Master. Now what he wants to do is put Scarab counters on things, which gives him an ability to slow down his opponent, because every Scarab counter counts as a -1, -0 on opponent's clash cards, and get a card draw from that. Every time he sacrifices 3 Scarab counters, he gets to draw a card. Now how does he do that in practical terms? Well, he sends cards, either his own or his opponent's, back to the hand. So the downside for Kheprius is that he's a 20 life 1 defense contender, which means he's sort of on the back foot from the very beginning, only having 20 life. So he needs to slow down his opponent, and Scarab counters help him with that. One of the other disadvantages he has is that for what we've seen so far at the time of filming, much of the Kheprius cards have a fairly high specific resource cost. Now that means that it's hard not to commit to his colors. You might be able to splash something in, but to really go equal parts in 2 or maybe 3 colors is very, very hard. Now it's not impossible, but it is a consideration you need to do when building decks. So the reason I mention this is because from my point of view, you need a multicolored deck with Kheprius to get enough support for what you want to do, which is sending cards back to hand to get Scarab counters, to get the effects. And my first thought went to Shadowlight. Now Shadowlight is white and black, not blue, but he does have a lot of support in the decks already out, and what he really wants to do is get back to your hand and add bonuses for you, so you can get things back to hand and play Shadowlight cards, so you get multiple effects from that, other than the Scarab counters that Kheprius will give you. Something like Shadowlight Eclipsing Fighter might do this for you. When he does damage to a contender, he returns to your hands and let you play another Shadowlight. Now you get another body on the ground, but you also with Shadowlight get to put a Scarab counter on something, slowing your opponent down or out, or providing card draw for you. Another one is something like Shadowlight Darkness Rising, that lets you play that by returning a Shadowlight card to your hand, again getting your Scarab counters and getting a body on the ground, so to speak. Now Shadowlight is black and white and not blue at all, so there is a downside, as I mentioned. What I would recommend to do is to go to Deckplanet, where there is an article written up about Kheprius. It's a great article, had great fun reading it, and it does give it another perspective. I of course will leave a link to that in the description, so you can go read that once we've done with the tier list, of course. Now before I get to the conclusion about where to put him, the first contender in the tier list, I want to point out this: he's very, very reliant, at least to my perspective, on getting cards to hand and putting scarab counters out. Now, the only way I can see reliably preventing him from doing that is simply by clearing his board all the time. That is a commitment of resources on the opponent, and I have not yet been able to find an efficient way to do that and still execute another plan. So that leads me to put him fairly high on the list, because if he is a fairly solid strategy with good support and no real way to solidly counteract that will bring him to Harbinger tier. Now the next contender is Entropy, the Progenitor of Chaos, and what he wants to do, it seems, is to banish his own things. But to what end? Well, he does get +1/+0 for every 10 cards in his banish zone, not his Oblivion, in his banish zone. But that doesn't amount to a lot, so there has to be another gimmick to him. But what it does do is point us in the direction of a very aggressive strategy for this contender, almost to a point where it reminds me of the very first Magnate, that sort of wanted to attack with everything on every single turn, trying to outpace your opponent before they could sort of get their game together and start to racing them to the finish line. I get the same vibes from here. Sometimes you can glean the strategy by looking at the associated clash buffs. They're more or less a match, and in this case what the clash buff does is perfectly in line with what the contender does. Once you play the clash buff, it not only gives you +1/+1, meaning more aggressive strategies, it also lets you banish a clash card from your Oblivion, and even adding more aggression to it by giving it +2/+0. Well, that sort of points us to this strategy of an aggressive play. At the time of recording, which is post spoiler seasons, pre-launch of the set, what do we know of cards that would support this strategy? Well, one of them is Entropy Blood for Power. It's a 3/1, it's a 3-cost 3/1 that has close combat, but the interesting part here is that it has a trigger attack that lets you banish a clash card from your Oblivion, again adding to the banish pile, and when you do that it becomes invulnerable in the clash phase, so you can't kill it on that clash phase. That leaves the opponent with the very interesting choice of how much damage they will let it do before they actually take care of it, meaning they need to spend resources to get rid of it more than executing their own plan. That is always an interesting decision to make, and this one forces this. A note to that is that Entropy is a 14 life contender, so you want to sort of get ahead in the damage dealing department. So you're not going to win if you deal 3 for 3 going tit for tat all the way through, then Entropy will just outlast you. And there are other cards such as Entropy, Rule Through Ruin, that will support the same strategy and the clash buff I mentioned earlier. So all in all, that looks like a fairly solid base. Now we cannot evaluate him without addressing the elephant in the room. The elephant being that he is colorless and he has to pay life for playing specific resources, specific colors. So trying to assess this impact on his gameplay, I went to look at the top decks from the last Pro Tours, both in the US and in the Philippines, and trying to gauge how much is the specific resource cost for top level game packages, right? So what I found out that is a card specific resource cost is about 1.7, which means that if you were dealt no other damage, he could play almost 40% of his deck. If it was all colors, he could play almost 40% of his deck before being, well, killed by his own hand. So if you want to lean into the colorless cards as well, that is even prolonged further, letting him getting some pretty powerful cards. And remember, he does not have to adhere to the color scheme, meaning he can play any colors as long as you have enough resources. he can play a 3 cost no matter how much the specific resource cost is. So taking that into consideration, how do I think he will fare? Well, I think with 40 life, and if you build the deck in that manner, he will outpace, well, maybe not outpace, but outlive the more aggressive contenders out there. However, he will outpace, because of an aggressive strategy, the more mid-range or control-y decks that will need to find resources to deal with his shenanigans. So I think he will do fairly well against both those strategies. So what does that place him? Well, he's not that good that I think he will end up in the very top ranks of the circuits. He will not necessarily be the one that is given to win the Pro Tour, for instance. So maybe with time and more support he could rise from the ranks, but for now I'll put him in Harbinger tier. Windhoof, hero of the many. I have a soft spot for centaurs, and this centaur may look like a valiant warrior, but what he really wants to do is throw arrows around. So there is that. The reason he wants to do that is because whenever he throws an arrow, he can engage and add some more damage to his opponents. Now, once he's down to 15 of his 20 health, starting health, he also can, whenever he challenges, activate a trigger victory effect. So that might be a way to get some bonuses into his gameplay. At the very start, I thought of him as a control style play, throwing arrows around, keeping the board clean until he could have a big threat out to sort of end game everything. But he needs the arrows, and at the time of recording there aren't many of those. They basically come in 2 types. There are green traps or there are white actions. That's it. That's the arrows we have, more or less. Luckily both of them work with his ability, because he does not care whether you activated or played them. So thumbs up for that. Now at the time of recording there are 5 different arrows, meaning that if you go for full play set of each of them, there is 20 card in your 50 card deck, which should be sufficient, but not much room for personal influence. And not all the arrows are equally suited for the strategy. Something like Blazing Arrow deals damage, sure, but it does require you to have a weapon and to engage your contender, sort of nullifying his effect of dealing extra damage to clash cards. So not the best fit. On the other hand, there is arrows such as Piercing Arrow that lets you deal damage and let you use your contender ability, maybe even giving you as much as 4 or 5 damage. So looking at the weapon side, there is good news as well. Something like Lunar Blade works perfectly with Windhoof. That it's a white weapon that you can attach to clash cards, not to contenders sadly, but will boost them +3/+0. But it even, as an added bonus, it lowers the price of your action cards by 1 white, meaning that Piercing Arrow all of a sudden is down to a single resource to play. Not bad for 4 or 5 damage. Now Windhoof's ability to trigger victory effects may be an expensive treat. It only works once he's reached 15 life, as I mentioned before, but he has to challenge to get it, so he might be taking damage even if he is removing things from the board, and when he does that is probably fairly late in the game, so it's pretty big what he is attacking. So he needs to find a way to defend himself in order to be able to do that, to trigger the effects. So might not be the best effect for what I've seen so far. So how does he fare competitively against the other contenders? Well, the reactiveness of his gameplay with the quick action arrows, at least, let me think he can keep himself alive for a bit, but there isn't a clear winning strategy for him, at least not one I've seen, and that means that he probably is going to go into the alpha tier. Let's turn up the heat. Gearwin, Steampunk Engineer. Now, diminishing cards and gaining the best of them by paying life back to your hand is a fairly good way to die when you only have 20 life, even though you do have 1 defense. So luckily, Gearwin comes with a sub-strategy of a recover. Now, drawing cards and gaining life is not a win condition per se, so there must be more you can do. Well, before we go into that, let me explore some of the mechanics for Gearwin and why some things might work out for her. To start, let's look at her second contender ability. At 12 life, just 8 life down, she gets the ability to diminish up to 3 cards to gain a +3 in defense whenever she's attacked, the contender that is. That in and of itself is a fairly good quality that resolves once and lasts for the clash, for the specific clash. But if one of those cards was a discover card, the effect lasts to the end of turn. Also notably is that whenever she does that, it counts as a trap being activated, which is fairly important, it turns out. So there is a sub-theme about discover cards. Before we dive into that, let's just look at the life gain bit of this. Now, we know we can get discovered somehow, but what about the life gain? Well, one of the interesting things is the Gearwin specific clash cards. Something like Restorative Steamsmith, that is a 3-cost red rogue that lets her gain life if a discover is activated. Also, her clash buff, Engineering Execution, lets her get +1/+1 and recover 1. And if a non-trap action, a non-ambush trap was activated this turn, her second ability to defend herself, you even get to draw a couple of cards. Very powerful effects from the clash buffs. Now, going into the Discover part of this, well, Discover was released with Echoes of Eternity in Iron Piston in black, and if you want to go with Discover for her, which you might, you have to borrow Discover card from Iron Piston and Echoes of Eternity, and there might be a fair amount to get. It's not a big thing. Also, for her to work, at least from my point of view, you would need to go a bit into the weapon side of this, and again borrowing from Iron Piston in black. So red-black Gearwin is the way to go. So in order to address how she will win, we need to remember one thing. The one dealing the most clash damage, or the most damage, is not necessarily the one who wins. The winner is the one with most life remaining at the end of the game, where one has 0 and the other one hopefully has a plus. So that is the key, I think, to how Gearwin will win. Small damage here and there, extra effects from her discoverers or her weapons, and then simply outlasting her opponent. Now, is that a competitively viable strategy and the top tier level? I don't think so. It's an interesting strategy, but I don't think she will do I don't think she will do well at the Pro Tour. So that will be Alpha tier. Well, it's time to talk about the healer from Elder Law, Valen Solariel. Well, Valen Solariel is a 20 life, 1 defense contender, very ordinary in that sense. So let's lift up, see what she has underneath. Well, for one, I think she has a very solid card draw engine. What I mean by that is that whenever she would gain life, she gets to draw a card, well, at least once per turn. So there is an extra card draw on that. How does she do that? Well, she grants recover 1 to all of her rogues. So whenever a rogue actually deals contender damage, she gains life and draw cards. Now, you can only do this once per turn, and you need play actions in order to give rogues the ability of recover 1. So there is a balance to be had there. However, there is a lot of rogues and a lot of actions. But the deck does require a bunch of rogues and a bunch of actions. So how's the support for that? Well, it's quite good actually. Rogues are in every single colour out there. They have been supported from the very first set and all the way up until now, set 7, and we could expect them to be continued, right? And she doesn't care about which type of rogue it is, so you can do whatever the rogues wants to do underneath all of this, because she, Van Solarial, just let them do their things. Now, while this may give a renaissance to classical white cards such as 5/5 Flying Lin or Clouty Foreseeing Fate, you might want to take a look at the Van Solarial cards such as Beacon of Hope or Sunborn Paladin, which are very interesting cards. Now, having the flexibility in colours also goes for actions. Actions are in every colour available, so having the rogue strategy, as you can pick and choose any colour of rogues you want. Remember, AC does not care. Or any action colours you want. That combination means that you can build almost anything underneath. This, for me, makes her, Van Solarial, one of the most flexible contenders, but maybe barring entropy, that we have in the game. You can play, you can hide almost any strategy underneath with a contender that is capable of drawing you cards and keeping herself alive, so you can build whatever you want down beneath, as long as it is rogues and as long as you have actions. So I think that's very strong. Now, this is one of the contenders that I'm really looking forward to all the smart builders out there, all the smart cats in this game, to start tinkering with. Because once they figure her out, I think this is a very, very, very strong contender. In fact, she's so strong, I think, that I will put her in Harbinger tier. Fangwin, the Defender of Dracorath. Well, we sort of knew he would be coming this set because he's been sort of spoiled through the earlier sets, and we know that him and Ansudag in the story has a clash that they need to do. Now, what does Fangwin want to do other than beat up Ansudag? Well, it seems like he wants his contender to attack and have weapons that are tempered. Now, he's leaning very heavily into dragons, which is fine, and into tempered weapons. But what we didn't talk about with Windhoof is, why would you temper a weapon to begin with? Well, there are cards that gains benefits when you have tempered weapon. Something like Fangwin Locked into Battle actually get +1/+0 for every tempered counter on a weapon you control. Doesn't even have to be attached to the clash card, you just need to control them. Now, all weapons can be tempered, but I want to mention the contender weapon associated, at least for me, with the dragons, and specifically Fangwin, the dueling dragons. Now, the dueling dragons can be tempered multiple times, and if you do so, it gains an efficiency, or it gains the ability to grant safeguard to other things. But tempering weapons is a fairly new strategy, a new mechanic, so there might not be enough support for this. For instance, there isn't a lot of green weapons, and Fangwin being green might want to go that way. So that might be an issue, even if Alpha Clash does not have to match the color identity of the contender with the deck you're playing. It sort of makes it a little bit weaker strategy, in my opinion. Or maybe you correct it once something wins. On the other hand, he does lean into not just tempered weapons, but also dragons. And dragons, green dragons, are very well supported in Alpha Clash. They came out fairly strong in Echoes of Eternity, dragons as a whole, but also green dragons. And continuing into Ancient Alphas, it's just growing in support. So the dragon side of this may be very well supported. So where would I put this guy? Well, I think he's very interesting. I think we should be afraid of dragons, but maybe not at a Pro Tour level. We have to peg him down a little bit to an Alpha tier. Now that was the tier list from my point of view. Did I miss something important? Is there a contender that should be higher or lower on the list in your opinion? Let me know down below in the comments why they should be higher or lower, what I missed in there. And I do apologize for the sound of my voice. I have a bit of cold at the moment, but I want to get this out before we get too far into the Ancient Alphas. So thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you in a bit. See you then. Bye. I feel an absence.
Hold on a bit. If you want to support the channel and still get TCG stuff, go to kelso.dk and write the promo code just1clash in the comment section of your order at checkout. Thank you very much.
So here's the thing with the absence. So some of you may have noticed that there is one more contender in Ancient Alphas, the absence. Now, at the time of my recording, I don't know much about him. The strategy seems widely open. It seems he wants the absent cards, but we haven't hardly had any of those spoiled. So I have no idea where to put him. But you can help me out. Put that into the comments. Where, or grab me somewhere else, and tell me where should the absence go. Is he top tier? Is he progenitor tier? No, not quite, is he? But he's not Paul's tier. I don't know. Let me know in the comments below. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.